She wasn't supposed to look, but when Yara's eyes dropped, just for half a second, just long enough to catch what was pressing against the fabric of Jaewon's perfectly tailored trousers, the words tumbled out of her mouth before she could swallow them back. That's way too big. Everything stopped. The air, the music drifting from the other room, even her own heartbeat. Jaewon didn't smirk, didn't laugh, didn't move fast. He simply tilted his head, those dark eyes anchoring her in place, and took one slow, deliberate step forward, close enough that she could feel the warmth rising off his chest like a furnace, close enough that her back found the cool glass of his penthouse window, close enough that she forgot her own name. Yara. His voice was quiet, unhurried, the kind of calm that made powerful men terrifying. Look at me. She did, and the patience she found in his eyes, the hunger beneath it, the absolute control holding it all together, made her legs feel like warm water. "I'll go slow," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw like she was something precious. "I promise." Her pulse hammered so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She wanted to believe him. She did believe him, but this was never really about tonight. It wasn't just about the way his hands moved, unhurried, deliberate, like the whole world could wait. It was about what came after. Because men like Jaewon didn't do temporary. Men like him didn't release what they claimed. And if she let him in, truly let him in, there would be no version of her life that didn't have him in it.
Welcome to K-Afro Narratives. Before we go any further, please like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Now let's go back to where it all began. 6 months ago, Yara didn't even know his face. She'd only gone to the exhibition because her best friend Amara refused to take no for an answer. Too many people, too much pretense, strangers standing in front of enormous canvases nodding like they understood something. Yara had been calculating her escape route when she felt it, that specific weight of being watched. She turned. He stood near the back of the gallery, dressed entirely in charcoal gray, completely still, like something carved rather than born. But he wasn't looking at the art. He was watching the room the way someone watches a chessboard, tracking every entrance, every exit, every person who shifted position. And then his gaze landed on her. She felt it physically, like a hand pressed flat against her sternum. He didn't look away. Neither did she. An hour later, she slipped out onto the gallery's outdoor terrace. She needed air, needed space, needed a break from the noise of people performing sophistication. She didn't expect him to follow, but suddenly he was beside her, quiet as fog. "You don't enjoy crowds," he said. Not a question. She turned, startled. "How would you know that?" "You've been here over an hour. You haven't spoken to a single person." Her pulse jumped. "Were you watching me?" "Yes." No apology, no smile, just honesty. She should have made her excuses and walked away. Instead, her feet stayed exactly where they were. "Does that frighten you?" he asked. Yara studied him, the sharp angle of his jaw, the way he held himself, like someone who'd long since stopped needing anyone's approval. And she realized with a quiet shock that no, it didn't frighten her. That frightened her more than anything. Before she could answer, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out, looked at the screen, and something in his entire bearing shifted. He turned away and spoke in rapid, clipped Korean, his voice dropping into a register that had nothing to do with
gallery openings or polite conversation. When he turned back, his expression had sealed itself shut. "I have to go." And just like that, he was gone. The next morning, Yara was at her usual corner table in the cafe she haunted every day, deep in a branding project, when a black coffee appeared beside her laptop. She looked up. No server nearby, no one lingering, just the coffee, and tucked underneath it a small card. No name, no title, just a number. She didn't call it, but 3 days later, he appeared in the cafe. He sat by the window, laptop open, his own black coffee in front of him. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her. He simply existed in the same space, and somehow that was louder than anything he could have said. 2 days after that, she saw him outside her building, leaning against a sleek black car like he had nowhere more important to be, scrolling through his phone without a trace of self-consciousness. He didn't wave, didn't speak. Then the bookstore on Thursday evening. her Thursday bookstore, the one she'd been visiting for 3 years. He stood in the poetry section, holding a book he clearly wasn't reading. It should have been alarming. Somehow, it felt like gravity. One rainy Tuesday, Yara left the cafe later than usual, stepped outside, and immediately remembered she'd forgotten her umbrella. The Seattle rain was coming down in sheets. She was steeling herself for the sprint when an umbrella appeared over her head. She turned. He stood beside her, holding it steady, expression unreadable. "Take it," he said quietly. Before she could form a single word, he placed the handle in her hand and stepped out into the downpour himself. No jacket, no cover, just him, getting soaked. Something inside Yara snapped loose. "Wait," she called out, going after him. He stopped. "Why do you keep appearing everywhere?" she demanded, rain plastering her braids to her face. "Why are you always just there?" He looked at her for a long moment, rain running down the sharp lines of his face. Then, quietly, "Because I can't seem to stop." That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have. That night, Amara came over with wine and deep suspicion. "Yara, listen to me carefully," she said, filling their glasses. "Men who just show up everywhere are either obsessed or dangerous." She paused. "Probably both." Yara stared at the card on her coffee table. "I don't even know his name yet." Amara's eyebrows flew up. "Then we Google him." Yara opened her laptop. She tried everything. Reverse image search, the phone number, Korean businessman Seattle, anything she could think of. Nothing came back. No LinkedIn, no social media, no digital footprint of any kind. It was like trying to search for a shadow. "That is not normal," Amara said, her voice going flat. "Everyone exists online. Everyone." Yara's stomach turned over slowly. Later, alone, she stared at the card. Then she picked up her phone, typed, "Who are you really?" Hovered, sent it. 3 dots appeared immediately. They pulsed once, twice, and then vanished. No message. Yara sat in the silence of her apartment and felt, for the first time, the cold edge of something she hadn't expected. Fear. He came to her door the next evening. 3 firm knocks, no warning, no text. Yara opened it with her heart already ahead of her. He stood in the hallway, dark jacket, dark eyes, expression giving nothing away. "Come with me," he said. Not a request. She should have asked where, should have demanded his name at minimum. Instead, she grabbed her coat. They drove through downtown Seattle without a single word, city lights bleeding past the windows. His hands steady on the wheel, jaw tight with something he wasn't ready to say. 20 minutes later, they stopped at the waterfront. The sound of the sound filled the space between them as they stepped out, salt and rain in the air. He walked to the edge of the dock and stood there, staring out at the water. Yara waited. "I'm not a safe person," he said finally, his voice low, something raw underneath the control. She didn't speak. He turned to look at her. "If you're thinking clearly, you stop answering my calls. You delete the number. You go back to your life and you forget you ever met me." She looked at him, at the weight he carried behind his eyes, and felt no urge to run. "What are you involved in?" she asked quietly. "Things you don't want to know." "That's not good enough. It's all I can give you right now." Yara took a step toward him, then another. "Then stop coming back, Jaewon." It was the first time she'd used his name, though she still didn't know how she knew it. Something about finally saying it out loud made the air change. His eyes darkened. "I've tried," he said, his voice fracturing just slightly. "I keep coming back anyway." Her chest ached. "Then don't lie to me," she whispered. "Whatever this turns out to be, just don't lie." He looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded, once, like a vow. On the drive back, Yara noticed the SUV 2 cars behind them. It had been there since they left the waterfront. She glanced at Jaewon. His knuckles had gone white on the wheel. He'd noticed too. He said nothing, and she didn't ask. 3 blocks later, the SUV turned off. His shoulders dropped slightly. At her building, he walked her to the door, his hand settling on the curve of her waist, warm and anchoring. "Lock your door tonight," he murmured. "Why?" His eyes found hers, serious and still. Just do it, and don't open it for anyone. Jaewon, please. The words sat between them heavy, with everything unspoken. She nodded. She watched him walk back into the shadows of the parking lot and thought, for the first time clearly, what kind of world am I walking toward? Everything fell apart on a Wednesday. Her most important client went silent overnight. 3 weeks of work swallowed without a word. A rent increase notice was taped to her door like an afterthought. $200 a month she didn't have anywhere in her budget. And when she called Amara to fall apart properly, her phone died in her hand. She sat on the steps outside her building as rain began to fall and simply stopped caring about getting wet. She was just so tired. The cold soaked through her coat, through her jeans, into her bones. She didn't move. She didn't hear him approach. One moment she was alone, and the next, Jaewon was sitting beside her on the wet concrete. No umbrella, no questions, no explanation. He just sat. Rain darkened his shirt and ran through his hair, and he seemed entirely unbothered by all of it. They stayed like that for a long time. Then slowly, like it was the most natural thing in the world, he reached over and took her hand. His palm was warm. Something inside Yara broke, quietly, without drama. Her fingers closed around his, and she held on. "Why are you here?" she finally whispered. He took a moment. "Because when I'm not, I can't focus on anything else." She turned to look at him, rain on both their faces. "You don't even know me properly." "I know enough." "What does that mean?" His jaw worked. "It means you shouldn't be sitting out here alone. It means I drive past your building and check for your lights. It means I should leave you alone, and I can't make myself do it." Her heart was doing something complicated. Before she could respond, he stood and brought her gently to her feet. "Come on," he said quietly. "You're soaked through." Inside, he moved through her apartment with quiet purpose, found a towel, came back and dried her hair with a gentleness that made her eyes sting. She sat on the couch, too exhausted to object and too overwhelmed to speak. "Lie down," he said softly. She did. He covered her with a blanket, then sat on the floor beside the couch, his back against the cushions, like a guard who'd appointed himself to a post. "You don't have to stay," she murmured, already half gone. "I know." He stayed anyway. The last thing she registered before sleep took her was the warmth of his presence and the steady, even rhythm of his breathing. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. When she woke, morning was bright through the windows, and he was gone. But her door was locked from the inside, which meant he had somehow locked it on his way out. Her phone, charged and placed neatly on the coffee table, had one message waiting. "You are not alone anymore." Yara read it 3 times and couldn't decide whether it was the most comforting or the most frightening thing anyone had ever said to her. Maybe it was both. After that night, things shifted. Jaewon didn't pull back. He showed up in the mornings with texts. Nothing dramatic, just "Did you eat?" and "Coffee before that client call?" He appeared at her cafe, working quietly across the room, his presence a low constant she'd unconsciously started listening for. Every time their eyes met across the space, the air between them felt denser. Every accidental brush of hands felt intentional. The distance was becoming unbearable. It happened on a Saturday. Yara was hauling groceries up 4 flights of stairs, bags cutting into her palms, when Jaewon appeared on the landing above her. "Let me." He was already reaching. "I've got it." He took them, all of them, anyway, without effort, and she followed him up the remaining flights, watching the way he moved, the quiet certainty of his body, the way he carried everything like it cost him nothing. At her door, she fumbled with her keys. "Thank you," she said, turning to face him. He was standing too close. When she looked up, she caught his eyes dropping briefly to her mouth. Her breath snagged. "Jaewon." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. His jaw tightened, and she watched him pull himself back from some edge. "Why won't you kiss me?" The question escaped before she could retrieve it. His eyes darkened. "Because once I start, I won't be able to stop." She felt her knees go unreliable. "Then don't stop." He shook his head slowly, like he was fighting gravity. "You don't know what you're inviting." "Yes, I do." "Jaewon, I'm not afraid of you." "You should be." She stepped closer, her pulse a drumline. Why? Because you have secrets? Because you're dangerous? His breathing shifted, got heavier. Because once I'm yours, I won't know how to let go. The words hung between them, equal parts promise and warning. Yara raised her hand to his chest, felt his heart pounding under her palm, fast and hard and real. Maybe I don't want you to. Something behind his eyes cracked open. He leaned in, his hand cupping her face, his thumb tracing her bottom lip. This was it. She let her eyes close. His phone rang. The moment shattered. He pulled back, his expression closing over like water after a stone, cold and controlled and gone. He looked at his screen, his jaw hardening into something she didn't recognize. I have to go. Jaewon! He was already in the hallway. Lock your door, he called back, without turning around, and then the sound of the stairs. Yara stood with her hand still half raised in the empty air and thought, what just happened?
Hours later, a news alert hit her phone. Breaking: warehouse fire in Seattle's Chinatown. Arson suspected. No casualties. She stared at the blurry photograph of orange flames and fire trucks and felt something cold move through her chest. The phone call, the way his face had gone to stone, the speed at which he'd left. She opened their messages, typed, "Are you okay?" Sent it. 3 dots appeared. Vanished. Nothing. Yara put her phone face down on the table and sat in the quiet of her apartment and thought, who are you, Jaewon, and what have you gotten yourself into? He texted 3 days later, I need to ask you something. Can I come by? Yara stared at the message. Relief and frustration tangled together somewhere under her ribs. Fine, she typed back. When he arrived, he looked wound tight, like a man bracing for something. There's a charity gala tomorrow night, he said, skipping all preamble. I need you to come with me. Why? It's important. That's not an answer. His jaw shifted. Please, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't necessary. Something in his eyes made her pause. This wasn't a casual invitation. This had weight. Fine, she said, but you owe me a real explanation after. He nodded. I know. The gala was held in a grand hotel overlooking the bay, all crystal light and old money and men in expensive suits with the particular stillness of people accustomed to being obeyed. Jaewon had sent a dress, deep emerald, perfectly cut, elegant in a way that made her feel like she'd borrowed someone else's power. She'd almost sent it back on principle. When she saw herself in the mirror, she decided to keep the power and return the principle later. When he came to collect her, the way his eyes moved over her said everything his mouth didn't. You look beautiful, he said, quiet and certain. She didn't answer. Inside the ballroom, his hand settled at the small of her back, warm and possessive, steering her through the crowd like he'd been doing it for years. Then a cluster of men approached, sharp suits, sharper eyes, the particular hunger of people who measure everything by what it's worth. They looked at Yara the way people look at things they're calculating. Sang-min, one of them said in accented English, and she filed the name away. You didn't say you were bringing company. Jaewon's hand pressed slightly firmer against her back. This is Yara, he said smoothly. My girlfriend. The word hit her like cold water. Girlfriend. She watched their faces shift, the calculation dialing back, a different kind of appraisal taking its place. And then she understood. This wasn't a date. She was a strategy. She played her part anyway, smiled at the right moments, laughed lightly, let his hand stay at her waist. But inside, she was quietly breaking. Near the bar, while Jaewon was across the room in conversation, a man appeared at her shoulder. Older, expensive cologne, a smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. His hand landed on her shoulder like he was picking something up from a shelf. Before she could respond, Jaewon was there. His hand shot out and caught the man's wrist with quiet, complete authority. Don't. Just the one word. The man's face went pale. He stepped back, murmuring an apology, disappearing into the crowd. Jaewon didn't look at him again. He just took Yara's hand and walked toward the exit. The car ride back was silent long enough to feel like its own conversation. Finally, Yara spoke. You used me tonight. His knuckles whitened.
Yes. To look normal, safe. Yes. And you didn't think I deserved to know beforehand? He exhaled slowly. I thought if you knew, you'd refuse. You'd have been right. Silence. Then, more quietly, but you didn't only use me, did you? It wasn't a question. Jaewon's head turned sharply. When that man touched me, Yara continued, her hands steady even as her hands weren't, that wasn't performance. That wasn't part of the cover. His breathing went rough. No, he admitted, it wasn't. You don't get to perform emotions you're not ready to claim, Jaewon. He looked at her and something raw and desperate crossed his face. Without a word, he changed direction. They weren't heading to her apartment. Where are we going? She asked. His voice was low when he answered. My place. Her heart slammed. Why? Because, he said, you deserve the whole truth. The penthouse was everything she expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows full of city lights, everything minimal and expensive and precise. Beautiful and cold, like a place someone slept in but never actually lived in. Jaewon poured whiskey, neat, didn't offer her any. He stood by the window with his back to her, gathering himself. My family runs legitimate businesses, import-export, restaurants, real estate. Yara waited. That's not the whole picture. She kept waiting. He turned to face her, and what she saw in his eyes was the thing he'd been carrying since the gallery. My father has led Korean syndicate operations for 30 years. When he steps down, it passes to me. That was decided before I was old enough to have a preference about it. The room felt very still. I didn't choose this world, he continued. I was raised in it. By the time I understood what it really was, leaving wasn't a door that existed anymore. What does it cost? Yara asked. His jaw tightened. Everything you can think of. Debts settled with blood, territory defended with violence, people who would put their hands on anyone I love just to show me something. She felt the full weight of those words settle over her. Tonight, he said, those men needed to see me as stable, untouchable, not a man who could be reached through someone else. If they saw vulnerability, they'd test it. So I was the proof. Yes, he didn't flinch. And I am sorry. But Yara, his voice broke at the edges, if they knew what you actually mean to me, you would not be safe. The room stayed quiet for a long time. Yara's heart moved through fear and past it into something that felt like grief, not for herself, but for him, for the boy who never got to choose, for the man who'd been handed a life he couldn't put down. I'm scared of you, she said softly. He flinched like she'd struck him. Not because of what you do, she continued, stepping toward him. Not because of your family or the world you were born into. She stopped just in front of him, her voice dropping to almost nothing. I'm scared because I think I'm falling in love with you regardless. He went completely still. Then his hands came up and cupped her face, and his forehead dropped to hers, and his breath came out in something that sounded like a man who'd been holding it for a long time. Then we're the same, he whispered, because I'm terrified too. And in his eyes, for the first time, she saw real fear, not of enemies or consequences or violence, fear of losing her. He walked her back slowly until the cool marble wall met her spine. His hand cradled her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with a tenderness that undid her. If we cross this line,
He said, his voice rough, everything changes. You become part of my world. That world will try to use you against me. I know. Yara. I know, she said again, firmer. His eyes searched hers, looking for hesitation. She had none. I'm choosing this, she said. I'm choosing you. Something in him came apart. All the control, all the walls, all the careful distance he'd maintained, gone at once. Then I'm yours, he said, hoarse, completely. Her breath hitched. Say it again. I'm yours, Yara, for as long as you'll have me. She pulled him in by his lapels. Then show me. His eyes went dark with heat and intention. Are you sure? She looked at this man, dangerous and broken and beautiful, and nodded, completely. His kiss was not what she'd imagined, slower, deeper, like he was learning the shape of her by heart. His hands moved with extraordinary restraint, one holding her face, one pulling her closer at the waist.
She could feel everything, the warmth radiating off him, the tension in his body, the evidence of his wanting pressing against her, undeniable. Her breath caught, and when her eyes dropped, just for a second, the words slipped out before she could stop them. "That's way too big." Everything stopped. He went perfectly still. Then slowly he pulled back just enough to look at her. One hand tilted her chin so she had nowhere to look but his eyes. "Yara," his voice was low, steady. "Look at me." She did. Dark eyes full of need and patience, and something that looked very much like care. "I'll go slow," he said softly. "I promise." Her pulse was everywhere. She believed him. "Okay," she whispered. He carried her like she was something he'd been waiting to hold, laid her down on sheets that smelled clean and expensive and like him. And then he moved through her like someone who had nowhere else to be and nothing more important to do. Every touch deliberate, every kiss slow and certain. "Tell me if it's too much," he murmured against her skin. "Tell me if you need me to stop." She didn't stop him. She pulled him closer. When he finally moved against her, inch by careful inch, she gasped, and he pressed his forehead to hers and said, "Breathe, I've got you." And he did. He moved with a control that made her ache, slow and steady and reverent, like this was something sacred. And when she finally broke apart with his name in her mouth, she felt it, the shift, the irreversible thing, the line behind them now instead of ahead. Afterward, they lay tangled in the dark, her head on his chest, his arm locked around her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, quietly, she asked the thing she'd been circling. "What happens now?" His chest rose and fell beneath her cheek. "Now," he said, "I protect you." She lifted her head. "From what?" His jaw tightened. "From my world. From people who would use you as a message. Jaewon. Even if that means protecting you from me." Her chest squeezed. "I don't need protection from you." "Yes," he said, cupping her face gently. "You do." Something behind his eyes looked like a door he was about to close. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't push me away now." He looked at her for a long, silent moment. Then he pulled her back down against his chest and buried his face in her hair. "Not tonight," he murmured. "Tonight, you're mine." She closed her eyes and memorized all of it, the warmth of his skin, the slow, steady knock of his heartbeat, because something told her moments like this had expiration dates. When she woke, the bed was empty and cold. The skyline was bright through the floor-to-ceiling glass. Her chest tightened. Then she saw it, a note on his pillow. She picked it up with unsteady hands. "Stay inside today. Trust me." Yara stared at those 6 words. "What's happening? Where are you?" She grabbed her phone. No messages, no missed calls, just the penthouse sitting around her, big and silent, suddenly more like a cage than a refuge. She ignored the note. She had a client call, a deadline, a whole life that didn't know it was supposed to pause. So she got dressed, walked out, went to her cafe. By noon, the prickling started, that specific feeling of eyes. She looked up from her laptop and her blood went cold. A man stood across the street, broad and still and completely uninterested in hiding, just watching. Yara's hands shook as she dialed. Jaewon answered before the first ring finished. "Where are you?" Sharp, already moving. "The cafe on Pine. There's a man outside. He's just standing there." "Don't move." The line went silent. He was there in under 5 minutes. She didn't ask how. He came through the door like weather, controlled fury moving through the room. His eyes found her first, checked her, checked for harm. Then they shifted to the window. His jaw went to stone. He pulled out his phone, spoke in rapid, quiet Korean, clipped and cold and final. Then he sat across from her, keeping the window in his peripheral vision. "Jaewon, who is that?" A message. From who? People who want to test where my softness is. And his eyes met hers, and the coldness in them made her breath catch. They have their answer. That night, Jaewon didn't ask. He went to her apartment, packed a bag of her things, clothes, laptop, charger, her sketchbook. "What are you doing?" "You're staying with me." "Jaewon, you're not going back there alone, not until this is resolved." His voice left no room for negotiation. "You can't just..." He turned and looked at her, and what she saw in his face stopped the sentence in her throat. "Yes," he said quietly, "I can." Later, unable to sleep, Yara opened his nightstand looking for her phone charger. Her hand found something cold and heavy instead. She pulled it out. Black, real, dense with purpose. Put it down. She spun around. He stood in the doorway, barefoot, expression completely still. You have a gun? Yes. In your nightstand? Yes. How many do you have? He crossed the room, took it carefully from her hands, locked it back in the drawer. I won't apologize for keeping myself alive, or for keeping you alive. Yara stared at him. Then she made a decision. Teach me. He frowned. What? Teach me how to take care of myself. If I'm in your world, I need to know how to survive it. Something moved across his face, pride and pain in equal measure. You don't know what you're asking for. I know exactly what I'm asking for. He studied her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. We do it my way. Fine. And, Yara, his voice dropped. Once you learn this, it doesn't leave you. It changes how you see everything. She met his eyes and didn't look away. I'm already changed. They started the next morning. Jaewon cleared space in his home gym, mats down, the weight of intention in the room. First rule, he said, voice stripped of everything soft. Every room you enter, find 2 ways out before you do anything else. She nodded, trying to concentrate. Hard to do when he was standing close enough that she could feel his body heat. Second rule, your instincts are faster than your thoughts. Trust them. He walked her through how to identify a tail, the patterns, the repetition, the subtle wrongness that meant someone was tracking you. Then came the physical work. If someone grabs you from behind, he said, stepping around her, his chest to her back, his arms wrapping around her in a controlled hold, you have seconds.
His voice dropped near her ear. Break the thumb. It's the weakest point they have. She tried to focus on the instruction. Hard to do when all she could feel was him. Show me, he said. She twisted, broke his grip exactly as he'd shown her, but the momentum brought them chest to chest, faces close, both breathing harder than the drill warranted. Again, he said, roughly. They ran it 5 more times. Each time the space between them collapsed a little further, the tension threading between them like current through wire. On the 6th attempt, she broke free, spun to face him, and something snapped. His hand caught her wrist, and then he was kissing her, hard and hungry and stripped of every wall he owned. They fell back onto the training mat, his weight over her, his hands in her hair. This was nothing like the first time. This was need without ceremony, urgency without patience. When he finally pulled back, both of them were wrecked. You should resent me for this, he said hoarsely. Yara shook her head, hands fisted in his shirt. I should. I don't. I've pulled you into a world where you have to learn to fight just to be safe. I know. You should leave. I won't. His forehead dropped to hers. Why? Because I choose you, Jaewon. All of it. Every part. That afternoon, while she showered, she heard his voice through the door, low and urgent, speaking Korean. She shouldn't have listened. Something in his tone held her still. She cracked the door slightly, water still running. Take all of it. The shipment, the territory, all of it. A pause. I don't care what it costs me. Guarantee her safety. Another pause. She is completely off limits. You have my word. When the call ended, Yara eased the door shut, heart hammering. Later, he was at the window when she came out. Everything okay? She asked carefully. Fine. That call. Business. Jaewon. She stepped toward him. What did you give up? His jaw tightened. Nothing that matters. Don't. Yara, what did you trade for my safety? He met her eyes, and for just a moment she saw it, the cost, the magnitude of the loss, before the mask came back. Nothing I can afford to lose, he said finally, but she understood. Whatever it was, it had been everything. Yara woke to an empty bed on a Thursday morning and something heavier than usual in the silence. She reached for her phone. A news alert sat on the screen. Breaking. Seattle federal authorities arrest key figure in Korean organized crime operation. Warehouse raid. Suspect believed to be in his early 30s. She stopped breathing. She dialed. Voicemail. Dialed again. Nothing.
Panic was already in her hands. 3 hours later, the penthouse door opened and Jaewon walked in, exhausted and unharmed. The relief that moved through her was violent. "You're okay?" she breathed, crossing the room. "I saw the news and I thought—" "It wasn't me." She went still. "Then who?" He set his keys down carefully. "My brother, Kyung." Yara blinked. "You have a brother?" "I've spent years making sure he never had to know this world properly." He moved to the window, and his voice went hollow. "My father wanted him trained, folded into the California operations. Kyung wanted nothing to do with any of it. So I arranged it, made sure there was just enough evidence to have him picked up on white-collar charges. Minimum security, 6 months. You set up your own brother to free him." He turned, and the pain in his face was enormous. "When he comes out, he'll have a record. He'll be useless to the family. They'll stop wanting him. He'll get to have a real life. And you?" His expression settled into something immovable. "I stay." "Why?" "Because if it isn't me, it's him, and I won't allow that." Yara felt her heart breaking quietly. "So you're trapped?" "Yes." "Permanently?" He didn't answer. They both knew. That night, he held her tighter than usual, like she was something he could lose between one breath and the next. "If something ever happens to me—" "Don't!" She pressed her hand flat against his chest. "Don't do that." "Yara, no, I don't want to hear the end of that sentence." He pulled her closer, his arms a whole structure around her. "I need you to understand." "I understand everything," she said fiercely. "I understand you're dangerous and complicated and that your world is trying to swallow both of us. And I'm still here. I'm still choosing you. You shouldn't." "Too late!" He buried his face in her hair, and for the first time since she'd met him, she felt his body shake. Not from cold, from weight, from everything he carried and everything he sacrificed, and the freedom he'd handed his brother that he'd never get to taste himself. "I love you," she whispered into the dark. "Don't," he said roughly. "Don't love me. Already too late for that." His arms tightened around her until she could feel his heartbeat against her cheek. "Then God help us both," he murmured. The ultimatum came 3 days later at midnight. Yara woke to find him rigid by the window, phone in hand, something in his posture that made her sit up immediately. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer right away. When he turned, his face was granite. "They want me to step down." "Who?" "The council, the families who hold the West Coast." His jaw flexed. "They think I've become a liability. Because of me." He didn't deny it. "What happens if you refuse?" He crossed the room slowly and sat on the edge of the bed, his hands around hers. Silence. "When?" she whispered. "Soon." Yara steadied herself. "So what do we do?" He looked at her, and the pain behind his eyes was the kind that lives deep. "I can get you out. New identity. Somewhere they will never find you. You'd have to leave Seattle, leave your life." "Leave you?" His breath was unsteady. "Yes. And you'd stay here and fight alone?" "It's the only way to guarantee your safety." "By losing you? By keeping you alive?" Yara stood. "No. Yara!" "I said no." She turned to face him, and she was more certain than anything. "I'm not running. I'm not disappearing. I am not forgetting you. If you stay, you're choosing war." "No!" She stepped forward, placing both palms flat against his chest, feeling his heart moving fast beneath her hands. "I love you. I'm not leaving. So whatever this is, we face it side by side." He pulled back to look at her, hands framing her face, forehead against hers. "You are the bravest person I've ever met. Also possibly the most unreasonable. Probably." Something broke in him that wasn't all sadness. "Then we fight," he said. "Together," she said. He kissed her then like he was afraid it was the last time, and when they finally separated, something had changed in the room. This wasn't just love anymore. This was a decision, and they'd made it together. The next morning he made a call. When he hung up, he turned to her, his voice stripped back to something clean and simple. "It's done. I told them no. Now we prepare."
What followed wasn't what she'd expected. No explosions, no dramatic confrontations in dark alleyways, just quiet, calculated moves. Jaewon on the phone for hours, speaking Korean she couldn't follow, meetings in good restaurants with people who had careful eyes, deals she wasn't part of, but that he always came home from. And slowly, without fanfare, she learned to trust the process, to trust him.
3 months later, something lifted. The tightness that had lived in Jaewon's shoulders for as long as she'd known him gradually eased. The men who'd stood across streets watching her dissolved. One evening, he came home early. Yara looked up, surprised. "It's finished," he said simply. "The threat, it's handled." She stood. "How?" "Leverage. Alliances. I gave them what they wanted without giving you you." "What did you give them?" "Territory in California, a stake in 3 operations, and my father's seat on the council." "Your father agreed?" Jaewon's expression darkened briefly. "He didn't have much choice." Yara looked at him, at the clean lines of his face, looking for regret. Found none. "You gave up everything." "No." He pulled her close, his arms settling around her like they'd been designed to be there. "I gave up his empire, not ours." And that was when she understood it fully. Love wasn't the absence of danger or the guarantee of easy. It was the decision to keep showing up, to keep choosing, to stay, especially when staying cost something. 2 weeks later, Jaewon made dinner. Actual dinner, with an apron he wore with complete unself-consciousness and a focus that made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. Yara sat at the kitchen island and watched him move through her domestic space and felt something warm and certain settle all the way down to her feet. This was what all of it had been for. Not the penthouse, not the protection, just him, here, quiet and present, building something ordinary out of the extraordinary mess they'd survived. "I have something to say," he said, plating the food. Her stomach tightened. "Go ahead." He set both plates down and leaned against the counter, steady, deliberate, himself. "I'm stepping back." "From?" "The family's operations." His eyes held hers. "Not entirely, I can't disappear completely, but back far enough to build something different." "Like what?" "A life," he said simply. "Mine." A pause. "Ours, if that's what you want." Yara's breath caught. He reached into his pocket and placed something on the counter between them. Not a ring, a key. "Move in with me," he said. "Not for safety, not as protection, because I don't want to wake up in a place you're not in." Yara looked at the key lying between them. She thought about a gallery where a man stood watching exits instead of art, a business card under a black coffee, rain falling on both of them on concrete steps, a locked door, a note on a pillow, a brother freed, an empire surrendered. Everything he had given, slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to give but himself. She picked up the key. "Yes," she said. The relief that crossed his face was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. He covered the distance between them in 2 steps and pulled her in and held her. "I love you," he said against her hair. "I should have said it long before now." "You're saying it now." "I love you, Yara, completely, without reservation." Tears moved up the back of her throat. "I love you too," she said. "Both of us, completely." Later that night, they stood on the balcony together. The city spread out below them, bright and sprawling and indifferent. His arm was around her waist, warm and sure. "It won't always be smooth," he said quietly. "I know. My past isn't done with me entirely. I know that too. But I will always protect you." Yara leaned into his side, the key still warm in her hand. "And I will always stay." He pressed his mouth to her temple. And standing there, wrapped in each other, Yara understood the full truth of it. This love would never be simple. It would be complicated, imperfect, threaded through with risk and history, and the residue of a life he'd been born into and slowly, painfully chosen his way out of. But it was theirs, built on honesty and the specific courage of people who kept choosing each other even when the world pushed back. And that, she thought, that was more than enough. The end. Thank you so much for joining K-Afro Narratives for this journey. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support is what keeps these stories coming. Until next time, choose love, even when it's complicated. Stay for the people worth staying for, and never underestimate the power of someone who keeps showing up.